Hi everybody and welcome to this video. My name is 𝗕𝗂𝘀𝘆, I'm a musician and producer, and in this video I want to show you how you can create funky, moving, very rhythmical bass lines inside Ableton Live, or possibly also in any other type of DAW. So for demonstration purposes I've created a bass channel that just carries some instance of analog. I picked the muted wow bass because it really applies to the type of sound I like to use for bass synthesizers, but you can pick any sound you like, of course. And I just programmed some 4-bar loop with just one note at the start of every bar. So we start with some rather boring bass line so we can see how we can actually make it more exciting. And also I created some drums because often bass comes together with drums. I mean, not always, but often it's the case, and they kind of work together. And for the things that we're going to do, it kind of makes sense to have drums as well, because if you make the bass a little more rhythmical, a little more exciting, usually it works well to have some very steady drum kind of groove. And it would possibly also work the other way around, that your drums are a little more busy and the bass is more solid and simple, but we focus on the other example. But because of that, it makes kind of sense to have the both things together. And like right now it sounds just like this. So yeah, I mean, it's not awful, but for sure you might also think, okay, it's kind of there, it exists. But now the challenge is to just make it a little more moving and just get the groove out of this. And I'm just moving gradually by doing very tiny changes to doing a lot of changes, and if those first steps still seem a little too boring to you or are not necessarily what you're looking for, be also invited to just jump to a section that you can check with the timestamps and just check out the one that sounds the most interesting to you. The first thing to do is that you can actually experiment only with quarter notes, because you know, if you count, you have always 4 counts, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's a bit difficult with only quarter notes, but we're going to try, because there's one thing that is called syncopation, which is always a little shady in terms of how to properly define it, but it mainly means that these are notes between counts. And so instead of always feeling like you have notes sitting on every count of the beat or on some counts, you have something that interrupts this kind of steady flow. And some example of this would be to drag a note 1 quarter note ahead. So the kind of new harmony in this case comes earlier, and this way you just interrupt a little this kind of continuous but also boring motion. And here it would work nicely to do the same. And actually we can speed it up for this example a little. And actually now we created already some nice kind of interplay, because the bass has a short moment of being active here by playing this note earlier. And then you see the drum part has one time where it plays this kind of double kick. And it's just in a moment where the bass is quiet. So usually you can always try to have some interplay of drum and bass this way, and it already makes the music a little more exciting. And let's just add a few more notes. Maybe just the second one of this first one. And maybe even, oh no, this is the part where we have the kick drum. And maybe 2 notes here. So now it improved already. We have a little more motion, but sometimes it's also nice to add some additional notes, because now we just stick to those 4 notes that I picked. And there's one thing called chromatics, which is just a description for all notes are possible. So you don't have a scale where you have steps or jumps or things like that. You just, if you would play it on a keyboard, you would just press every half step that comes up, or every note that actually exists. And you can approach bass notes chromatically by just picking the note next to the one you want to approach. So because here at the end we want to approach this one, which is A. And so we could try to go down there from the B flat or A sharp. Let's check this. See, it kind of works. And for those kind of approaching notes within the chromatics, for bass lines, you can ignore all the kind of tonality you're in, because for bass, those kind of chromatic steps always sound really nice. Let's check this one. And this way we made it more exciting already. You can also do longer cycles of chromatic notes. So let's say we want to still approach the A. And so the last one before A would be B flat, but we also take this one and this one. Oh, sorry, this one I mean, of course. Oh, I'm sorry, the click is still on. Now it interferes a little with this kind of double kick here, so it's not optimal, but I just wanted to show you some example of chromatics, because you could also make a whole bass line like this, which is actually really fun. And so we go back to our first position. This is kind of the system that you find in jazz a lot, which is called walking bass. But also this kind of bass line, for example, of Superstition of Stevie Wonder has kind of this vibe that you try to approach just always the next note by some chromatic lines. So let's do this, for example. Okay, here we... Actually, here we do the other way around, because sometimes it's nice to just do a jump. And then we continue here. And now you see we are actually one too high, so we just transform them to move them one position lower. And here, now again, we want to go to A, so we have to approach it from B flat, B natural, and actually, no, let's this time also, because you see there wouldn't be enough steps and I don't want to repeat the note because it can sound a bit weird. So we approach it this time from the G flat and just build a little kind of construction like this. Let's see how this sounds. Okay, so you see actually those things I created here, they sound a bit weird, so let's try to find a solution of making it approaching it from here. Maybe we just leave out a note. Yeah, let's do this, because then you kind of... no, here we have to go to the A. But yeah, I just forgot that you sometimes can also leave out notes, which is actually really nice to do, nice thing to do. And what am I doing? Like, we need those two. So you see, this part sounds really nice. This part sounds really nice. here it's a bit confusing, and this you would need to fine-tune with chords. Like if you have some chord progression, sometimes this kind of decides whether it works or not, because now we don't have chords, and so the bass line itself stays for itself. So then you immediately see what for the bass line itself sounds confusing. But with chords it can work. But this is a nice way of just generating some ideas and just then erase the weird stuff. So for example, this one was weird and this one was also weird, and maybe we just don't need so many of them. We just use one note as the approaching note. Yes. Something like that. Now let's go back to our first motive. And now we're going to use 8 notes. So you see those increments, they are actually 16th notes, and we're also going to look at those. But for now, 2 increments of 16th notes equal 1 8th note, and that's the kind of timing we use. And maybe we also change here to 8 notes, so we can just have a better control of this. And so now with 8 notes, you can see if I would add all of them, you have this kind of 80s type bass that sounds a little goofy, but I mean, it's an interesting start. If you're looking for this sound. But now here you can be a little freer by just experimenting a little with leaving space. So let's just always make sure for now that you have the note on the first note of the bar, so on the 2, 3, 4 indications here. But in between you can actually erase a lot of notes. And sometimes you can come up with extremely funky figures. And then you can just see, okay, where does it feel good, where doesn't it feel good, and then you just pick the place where it doesn't feel good and just maybe change it, drag it somewhere else. And for example, I like those 2 bass notes after each other. And this way you can build your basic kind of 8-note thing and maybe pick also one position where you do this kind of syncopated thing again, where the note comes just one, in this case 8-note position, earlier. Oh, and here actually if we do this, it sounds really nice if we also bring this one earlier. See, already way more exciting. And now we remember again this kind of chromatic thing, because for example in the end it sounds a little boring to have those 2 notes this way, and we can again just do the chromatic approach, because with 8 notes it sounds even more moving. Yes. And here exactly the same, especially if you have 2 notes, they perfectly lead in 8-note rhythm to the next note, and probably also here. Also with 1 note, just see the last note or the last 2 notes before the new kind of harmony you establish. Try to approach the note chromatically also here. Let's see what happens. Yes. And when you sometimes think like, okay, here the chromatics doesn't sound good, and for me it was this note, the other ones I liked a lot, you can also, but you have to know in which scale you are, which tonality, click here on the left side on scale, and for example this line is in A minor. And so now you can see, okay, this chromatic note is not within the tonality because the tonality is marked in this yellow color. but it doesn't matter because the motion of the part is so strong that it's just a nice bass line and it doesn't kind of sound strange with the other things around it. Because it's also short term. If you would stick on the C sharp for a whole bar, it would probably not work. But an 8th note or even a quarter note, as I've shown you, it works kind of nicely. But this one we saw doesn't work so well, so here we can maybe try to just use the note from the scale. Yes, why not? Or we take this one. Ah, this is better. Just to give you some ideas. And now we will move on to 16th notes. And so you can right click on this MIDI grid and pick this 16th note thing. And now we also change our first note original structure to 16th notes. And let's just have all of them to once see how this feels. And I'm also going to slow it down a little because yeah, for this type of beat, I guess like something around 100, a little below, would be a nice tempo. And this is something where you can make it super funky, but also super busy, because let's do again this thing of just erasing a couple of notes, because usually by random it already normally sounds kind of cool. So really don't think about this much. It will sound a little over the place, but it's okay for the beginning, just to show you how intuitive it can be to create bass lines. See? And so you can do it this way. Again, think of those chromatic things you could apply again. For example, here, let's just do it for one example. Oops. And works perfectly fine. But let's go back to the basic structure, because here I want to show you one type of technique that usually works nicely when you're working with 16th notes. It would be called like a dotted 8 note. It means that you have a note here, then you leave 2 free. And do this a couple of times, because this is some kind of organic rhythmic motion that kind of goes against the beat that we have. But for example, in Latin music, they always have claves that define the rhythm, and they have those kind of rhythms a lot in there. And this is kind of used there for stabilizing the music or giving some orientation to the people. And you can find it in funk bass lines a lot. So that's why it works so well, although it's kind of complicated and also at first it might confuse you a little. Let's just do it for the same note a couple of times. Yes, and once more. Of course, now it's static again because it's all the time the same, so you would need to come up with some variations. Maybe just do 3 ones here, then add this type of chromatic motion. Do 3 ones again and pull this one ahead with some little bit of chromatic. Have a short, actually do here the same thing, but starting here already. And maybe even putting this one now a 16th note ahead, and let's just see, it's too much. So this one was a bit confusing. Here there would be, I think we need a note on the 1, otherwise it's too confusing. try this. Let's here leave this one out, because if you pull something ahead in 16th note, on 16th note grid, it's nice to leave a little bit of space to digest. And here we can do our chromatic thing again. And of course, it's now still really busy, but to just give you the idea, just if you create it this way, then always pay attention to, okay, what do you think is too busy? What distracts you? And then you specifically try to either take those notes away or put them to another position. So, I mean, it's just the approach I show you, but you have to try it for yourself. And this way, find out at what point you feel comfortable. But this can help to just start up the creative process and give you those kind of vivid bass lines instead of sitting there and just hearing the same bass line forever. I think it's nice to freshen up your ideas by just also randomly dragging things. And I want to show you one more thing that I found out to be super amazing. It's a new feature of Ableton 11, and it's a little more experimental, but nevertheless, I always like experimental stuff, but this can also bring up some surprising bass lines, even if you're not into experimental stuff. And for this one, we have to make this arrangement here again. So fill out all the 16th note positions. You can do the same for the 8th note thing, but I'm going to show it to you in this 16th note type. And here on the left side, you have the velocity. We leave it this way, but you also have chance. And this thing is super cool, because now we can say how realistic it actually is that the note will be played. So because if we mark all of them and bring them down to zero, we don't hear any note. And if you bring them up a little, you get random rhythms, which can be super cool already, but it's a little too messy. And that's why I like to always pick a few notes that you want to have. Like, let's say we always want to have the 1, because this gives a very solid foundation. So let's say we also want to have this one, but here we want to have this kind of syncopated, anticipated last 16th note. And we also want to have maybe the last ones here, so it nicely leads into the first one again. And maybe there we do our kind of small chromatic thing. And let's see how this goes. And if you think it comes too often, you can thin it out. And you can get kind of cool things, and they are always a little different, of course. And of course, you can be more specific by saying, okay, this one very low probability, this one higher probability. And if you really have some concept, but I like to use this in a very general way, but let's just simulate this once. It's completely random right now. But sometimes it's nice to have random things that create nice things, because you don't always have to worry about composing the right thing. Of course, this can also really sound crazy in some fast tempos. And that was it already for this video. I really hope you got some inspiration on how to make your bass lines a little more funky, groovy, physical, dancey maybe even. And if that's the case, be warmly invited to subscribe to this channel, where you can find more videos about creative music production and also composition. Apart from that, I just wish you lots of inspiration again with whatever it is that you create, and would be really happy to meet you some other time soon again at this channel. Bye!